Before we begin, if you love stories that stay with you, gentle romances, gothic mystery, and hearts that find each other through darkness, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps this story reach someone else who needs it tonight. Now, let me take you back to the year 1872. The sky was a bruised violet when she arrived. Late October, the Carpathian Mountains, 1872. Her gloves were thin, her breath visible, and the paper in her coat pocket bore the name of a man she'd never met, but agreed to marry. The carriage did not stop fully. The wheels barely settled in the gravel before the driver jumped down, opened the door, and helped her out with the hurried courtesy of someone who did not wish to stay. "Castle Thorn," he muttered, tipping his cap without looking her in the eye. End of the line. And then he was gone. She turned. There, across the courtyard, was a house too grand to be called anything but a manor, and too bleak to be mistaken for a home. Its windows were black with reflection. Ivy coiled across its stone face like veins. The air was colder near it, as if it pulled warmth from the world. She did not flinch. A moment later, the door opened. The door opened not with a creak, but a sigh. Warm air spilled into the cold, carrying the scent of wood smoke and something older. Lavender, perhaps, faded by time. A man stood just within the threshold, silver-haired, neatly dressed in dark wool and gloves. He did not smile, but neither was he unfriendly. His gaze moved from her face to her suitcase and back again with quiet precision, as though weighing something. "You must be Miss Whitcomb," he said. His voice was steady and crisp, English with a slight northern bend. "Please, come in. The master regrets he cannot greet you himself." She stepped inside, the great wooden doors closing behind her with a solid finality. The entryway stretched up and up, vaulted ceilings draped in darkness. A chandelier hung above, unlit. Twin staircases curled away into shadow. The air was colder here than outside, but still she didn't shiver. "I'm Mr. Haley," the man continued. "The master's valet, housekeeper, steward, all that's needed, really." He turned and began walking, not waiting to see if she followed. "He has been called away on business," Mr. Hale added. "Unexpected, but temporary." Eleanor said nothing. The soles of her boots made soft clicks on the marble floor. Her eyes roamed upward, toward portraits she could barely make out in the gloom, faces framed in gold, eyes watching without warmth. "He regrets your not being met more formally," the butler said over his shoulder, as they passed beneath an arched gallery. "But he hopes you'll be comfortable until his return." She stood there for a while after the butler left, one gloved hand still resting on the handle of her suitcase. The fire snapped softly in the grate. A grandfather clock in the far corner ticked, not loudly, but just enough to be noticed. Everything else in the room was still. She stepped inside at last, her boots soundless on the thick rug. The tea was still warm. She poured herself a cup, not because she was thirsty, but because it gave her something to do. On the tray, beneath the linen napkin, was the folded note. She hesitated, then opened it. The handwriting was elegant, ink dark, precise. "Miss Whitcomb, welcome to Castle Thorn. You are safe. I look forward to making your acquaintance. She read it twice. There was no sincerely, no with affection, not even a soon. Just that final signature, Alaric Thorn. It didn't look like a man's name. It looked like a title carved into old stone. She set the note aside and took in the room. There was no mirror, no portrait, no flowers. Just a fire, a kettle, a high-backed chair, and a bed with carved posts like tree trunks. Her trunk had already been brought up, unlocked but untouched. She took off her gloves and rubbed her hands together. The fire was warm, but the room still felt watched. She undressed by firelight, trying not to think of the emptiness beyond the walls. The castle was enormous, but no other voices echoed through its halls. No footsteps overhead, no laughter, not even the hum of wind against the windows. Only silence. She laid down fully clothed and pulled the blanket up to her chin. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it came in pieces. She dreamed of footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving down the corridor outside her room. In her dream, she sat up in bed and saw a figure, a man standing just beyond the open doorway, backlit by moonlight, tall, motionless, and facing her. She couldn't see his face, only the suggestion of it, angular, almost sculpted, with hair like shadow and eyes like mirrors. She tried to speak, but her mouth wouldn't move. The figure didn't enter. It simply watched. And then she woke with a sharp breath. The fire was low. Her candle had gone out. She sat up, heart pounding. But the door was shut. No footsteps, no shadow, nothing. Just the slow, deliberate tick of the grandfather clock, and the feeling that the dream had not been entirely her own. The sky was the color of pewter when she woke. Pale light filtered in through the curtains, casting thin shadows across the bed. The fire had died to embers. She rose slowly, her limbs stiff from sleep, and dressed without ringing for help. The house remained as silent as it had been the night before. No sounds of servants, no distant voices, only the echo of her own movement. She stepped into the hallway and let the heavy door fall shut behind her. The corridor was lined with sconces, none lit. Dust clung to the baseboards, but not neglectfully, more like something preserved, as though the house had been waiting for someone and decided not to disturb itself in the meantime. She turned right, guided more by instinct than plan. At the end of the hall, past a pair of carved doors and beneath a stained-glass window, stood a single painting. It wasn't grand, not like the others she'd passed. Those hung in twos and threes like ancestors in a court. This one stood alone. It showed a man in a deep navy military coat with silver piping, a sword across his lap, and a single ribbon pinned to his chest. His hair was dark, long and loosely tied at the nape. His expression was not proud nor noble, but distant, watching something far off. His eyes were strange, painted dark but with a light within them. The plaque beneath read, Captain Alaric Thorne, circa 1672. Eleanor frowned. She knew the name. She had signed her own next to it. But this couldn't be right. This man looked the same, exactly the same as the drawing in the letter she'd received, the same as the man she'd imagined when she agreed to come here. Not an ancestor, not a resemblance. Him, 200 years old. She took a step back, then forward again, and then, gently, she reached out and brushed her fingers along the edge of the frame, clearing away a trail of dust. "Why do you look so sad?" she whispered. Above her, behind a narrow seam in the stone where the wall met the beams, he watched. He had stood in silence as the others passed through this gallery. Some glanced at the portraits and walked on. Some turned pale and fled back to their rooms. One fainted. But this one, she lingered. She touched the dust like it mattered, as though the stillness in the house was something to be understood, not feared. She leaned closer to his portrait, spoke to it, spoke to him. He closed his eye briefly, and something inside him, a memory or what was left of it, tightened. 41 women had arrived over the last year. He never summoned them. Mr. Hale placed the notices, sent the letters, managed the train tickets. It had been the old man's idea, a last try. Alaric had remained hidden. He let the house do the deciding. The echoes, the chill, the weight of silence. It was always enough, but not for her. This one was different. She was not unafraid. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the stillness in her breath, but she stayed. He moved back from the viewing slit, the candle in his chamber flickering as he passed. His private rooms were buried in the oldest part of the house, walled off behind a forgotten wing, accessible only by staircases even the butler pretended not to see. He had not slept in a bed in more than 100 years. He did not need to. Instead, he walked each night until the floors remembered his steps. He knew she would explore. They all did at first, but most never made it to the gallery. Most never touched the past. He returned to the wall again, and she was still there, still watching the portrait, still watching him. She appeared in the gallery again after dinner. No lights, no companion. Just a candle in one hand and her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. He watched from above once more. She wasn't looking at his portrait this time. She was looking at the wall behind it. She had noticed the faint outline of a door. Not a door anyone used. Just a line in the paneling, sealed long ago. She touched it. He held his breath, and then she stepped away. Not with fear, but with a kind of reverence. He stepped back from the hidden chamber as if giving her space she didn't know she'd earned. He leaned against the stone and said quietly, aloud for the first time in months, "She sees too much." The next afternoon brought a break in the rain. Eleanor wandered the grounds a little. Silent paths, bent trees, the occasional rusted statue lost in the overgrowth. But it wasn't the landscape that pulled her. It was the thought of that portrait, the way his eyes held sorrow like still water, the way she had spoken to the painted silence, half expecting it to answer. When the sky began to grey again, she returned inside. The east wing, though colder than the rest of the manor, no longer unsettled her. She passed the gallery again, pausing only briefly. Then she saw a narrow door just opposite it, smaller than the rest, almost hidden behind a faded curtain. She reached for the latch. The forgotten study dust lay thick on the floor. Cobwebs traced the corners like embroidery. Inside was a modest study, a desk, an armchair, a shuttered window that bled pale light through warped glass. Books lined the shelves, though many had decayed at the spine. She stepped toward the desk. One book lay separate from the rest, wrapped in a square of aged linen tied with a faded ribbon. She hesitated, then untied it. The leather was soft, worn by time and fingers long past. She opened it. The handwriting was careful, old-fashioned, inked in quiet, deliberate strokes. She carried the diary back to her room, wrapped once more in its linen cloth, as if it were something delicate, something sacred. The fire had been lit for her already. The tea tray was waiting, untouched. But Eleanor didn't touch it. She sat at the edge of the bed, unwrapped the book, and opened to the first page again. She read aloud, though barely above a whisper. She laughed without permission. That's what I loved first. The second was how she looked at the world, like it had not yet failed her, even though it had. Her eyes moved down the page slowly. Every word was deliberate, restrained and aching. I never told her what I was becoming. She kissed me once and said I felt like a man who'd lived too long without sunlight. I wanted to tell her then, but I was afraid she would run, and I wanted one more day. Eleanor drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her throat ached. She turned the page. The day I lost her, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. I did not deserve that sky. I buried the letter she wrote me beneath the tree where she used to read. I still hear her voice when the wind changes. Her hand trembled. She set the book down gently, fingertips still resting on the leather. She looked toward the window. The sky outside was black, but she imagined what the manor must have looked like then, when he loved her, when he still believed in days. She laid back slowly, the diary still open beside her on the pillow, and then, quietly, as if afraid to even say it aloud, "What kind of man writes like this and survives it?" Her voice cracked, just slightly. "Does a love like that exist now, does he?" She blinked back tears and laughed softly, bittersweet. "If you're still alive, if you even remember what love is, I wish I could meet you." He stood just beyond her door, still, silent. He had not moved in what felt like hours. Her voice had drawn him there, and now it held him, caught in the ache of memory and something far more dangerous, hope. He pressed his palm flat against the wood. It was the closest he had been to any living soul in nearly 100 years. She sighed once, and he heard it. The soft, aching sound of a woman yearning. He whispered into the silence, "You will not run." And then, just as quietly, "Please, don't run." Over the next few nights, something shifted. She returned to the same armchair by the fire, the diary always waiting, as if it had missed her hands. The flames were always lit before she arrived, and though she wondered whether it was Mr. Haley, she didn't believe it anymore. There was a quietness in the way the room greeted her, as if someone had been there not long before, someone who didn't want to be seen, but desperately wanted to stay close. She wrapped herself in her shawl, opened the worn pages, and read aloud into the hush of the manor. "I have lived many nights in silence, but this one is louder. I can feel her name behind my teeth. I do not say it. I fear it will undo me. She once touched my face while I slept. I pretended not to wake. I haven't been touched since." Eleanor pressed her hand to her chest, blinking softly as the rain tapped gently against the glass. "You're not a man anyone forgets," she whispered, not with words like that. And outside her door he listened. Her voice was quieter now, intimate, like she had stopped reading for memory's sake and started reading for him. He stepped closer than he had any night before, close enough that if the door had opened she would have seen him. But she didn't. She simply kept reading, and he stayed long after the fire faded into embers. One evening, she found a single white wildflower waiting in a glass dish beside the diary. She paused, touched it lightly, and said aloud, though the room was empty, "So you are real." She didn't seem afraid, just certain. She smiled and brushed her fingers along the petals, then turned the page. "She once told me I walked like I carried too much memory in my spine. I asked her what she meant. She said, "You look like someone trying not to remember something that hurts." She was right. Eleanor rested her chin on her hand. Her voice, when it came, was a breath. "You poor thing. You've been so alone." He leaned his head against the wall outside her chamber, eyes closed, and let those words break the silence inside his chest. No one had said that to him in over 200 years. Not even he had dared to admit it. And then, without meaning to, she stopped reading and started speaking. To him, not the author, not the diary. Him. "I don't know who you are, but I think I'm falling for you. Not because you're perfect, but because you feel so real. You loved someone once so deeply. You still remember her breath. What kind of heart remembers that?" She didn't cry. She only smiled quietly and turned another page. And behind the wall he listened, no longer with fear, but with awe. She sat at the breakfast table in the drawing room, her tea grown cold. The diary lay open beside her, but her eyes weren't on the page. She was thinking. 7 days, a week in this house, her trunks unpacked, her place quietly made, but no husband, no letter, no visit, no knock at the door, only the butler, polite as ever. The meals, perfectly timed. The fires lit before she arrived. She folded the page gently and closed the book. Enough wondering. Mr. Hale was in the south parlour, dusting the shelves when she found him. He turned, unsurprised to see her. "I hope you're comfortable, Miss Whitcomb." "I am," she said. "But I have a question." He set the cloth down. His eyes flickered, not fear, not quite, but alert. "Yes, miss. You said Lord Thorne was away, on business." "I did. Business lasting a full week." A pause. "The master's affairs are unusual. Time does not trouble him the way it does others." "That's a strange thing to say." "It is a strange house," he replied, then added softly, "and he is not a man like others." Eleanor watched him. His hands were folded, his back straight, but he would not meet her eyes. "Is he ill?" she asked. "Dead?" "No, miss, not dead." "Then why hasn't he come to see me?" Mr. Hale hesitated, then finally said with unexpected sadness, "Because he is afraid that once you see him, you will leave." She felt her breath catch. "I wouldn't." He looked at her then, long and quiet. "Then perhaps you should tell him that yourself." That evening, the house was quiet again. She had spent the day thinking of what Mr. Hale said. Perhaps you should tell him that yourself. Now she stood in the gallery once more, before the portrait that had become too familiar to be just canvas and paint. The candle in her hand flickered as she exhaled. She looked up at the eyes in the painting. They no longer frightened her. She spoke softly. "I don't know what you've seen that made you so afraid, but I've read your words. I've heard your heart, and I think maybe I'm not here by accident." The room held its breath. "I won't run. I'm not the kind who runs." She stepped forward and laid her palm flat against the bottom edge of the frame. "If you're listening, come back." She waited. No sound, no footsteps, just the wind brushing past the windows, as it always did. But she smiled, just slightly. "I'll wait here until you're ready." Then she turned and walked away, back down the long corridor, candle in hand, leaving only silence in her wake. And behind the wall, he was already there. But he could not move, not because he didn't want to, but because her words had struck too deep. "I won't run. I'm not the kind who runs." He closed his eyes. His hand rested just behind the panel, inches from hers. "If I were still a man, I would go to her tonight. I would take her hand in mine and let her see what I have become, and pray she still looks at me the same. But if she recoils, if she turns away, I could not bear it. She is the only light I have left." He looked down at his own hands, unchanged, undying, still cold. "I have lived without breath, without sleep, without time, but I cannot live without her, not any more." The hour was late. Too late, really, for wandering. But Eleanor couldn't sleep. She hadn't opened the diary tonight. Something inside her was restless, pulling her. She took her candle and wrapped her shawl around her shoulders. The fire had burned down, but the halls, cold and humming with old breath, called to her like a whisper. She didn't know where she was going, only that her feet knew before she did. Her candlelight flickered against the portraits as she passed. The floor creaked in soft complaint, and then a sound, a faint shuffle, like a foot dragging against stone. She stopped, held her breath. "Mr. Hale?" she whispered. No answer. She turned, and in that exact moment she collided with something solid, someone. Her candle jerked, the flame stretched, then held, and she looked up, straight into a chest, a black coat, high collar, broad, still. She blinked. Her breath caught, not in fear but in shock. And then he stepped back, just enough to let her see him, his face, him, the man from the portrait, the man from the diary, the man who had been haunting her silence with words she could never forget. Her lips parted, her voice caught. He didn't speak. He didn't move, except for his eyes, those ancient, impossible eyes, watching her like she was the last thing in the world he'd ever look at. She raised her candle a little higher. He didn't flinch. She reached out, just slightly, not to touch him but to confirm he wasn't a vision. "Alaric?" she whispered. A pause. Then, with the quiet gravity of a man who had waited 200 years for the sound of his own name said like that, "Yes." The candle trembled in her hand, but her gaze did not. He was still, unbreathing, as if afraid that the moment might vanish if he moved too quickly. She looked at him, not the way one looks at a stranger, but the way one looks at something they've already known in the quiet of their own soul. "You're real," she whispered. "I didn't mean for you to see me," he said, voice low and velvet dark. "Not yet. But I wanted to," she breathed. "I've wanted to every night since the first page." A long pause. "I thought if you knew who I was, what I was, you'd leave." She stepped closer. "I read your heart before I saw your face," she said, "and I stayed." His expression flickered, something between disbelief and the ache of finally being believed in. She searched his eyes, closer now. Candlelight caught the faint silver along his lashes. His skin, still and cold, held no fear for her. "You're cold," she said softly, almost to herself. He looked down, ashamed, took half a step back. "I didn't want you to feel that." She shook her head. "I don't mind. I wish you didn't have to be." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since the war that changed everything, his voice trembled. "I used to feel warm," he said. "I remember what it was, but I forgot how to want it." "And now?" she asked, her voice just above a whisper. His reply came like a vow. The candle trembled in her hand, but her gaze did not. He was still, unbreathing, as if afraid that the moment might vanish if he moved too quickly. She looked at him, not the way one looks at a stranger, but the way one looks at something they've already known in the quiet of their own soul. "You're real," she whispered. "I didn't mean for you to see me," he said, voice low and velvet dark. "Not yet. But I wanted to," she breathed. "I've wanted to every night since the first page." A long pause. "I thought if you knew who I was, what I was, you'd leave." She stepped closer. "I read your heart before I saw your face," she said, "and I stayed." His expression flickered, something between disbelief and the ache of finally being believed in. She searched his eyes, closer now. Candlelight caught the faint silver along his lashes. His skin, still and cold, held no fear for her. "You're cold," she said softly, almost to herself. He looked down, ashamed, took half a step back. "I didn't want you to feel that." She shook her head. "I don't mind. I wish you didn't have to be." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since the war that changed everything, his voice trembled. "I used to feel warm," he said. "I remember what it was, but I forgot how to want it." "And now?" she asked, her voice just above a whisper. His reply came like a vow. "Now I remember." She reached out. Her hand touched the fabric of his coat, slid slowly to the edge of his sleeve. He didn't move, and when her fingers grazed his, cold, yes, but steady, he closed his eyes, not because of fear, but because this was what he had waited for. Not a kiss, not a promise, a touch that didn't flinch. For a long time, they didn't speak. Her hand remained resting lightly against his. Her candle flickered between them, painting soft amber onto his sharp, moon-pale features. He didn't pull away, and she didn't retreat. The castle, always humming with old silence, held its breath around them. Even the wind outside seemed to still. She looked up at him, not to measure him, not to decide, but to memorize. The man she had imagined was quieter, sadder. But this man, he was real. And he was breaking in front of her, not in weakness but in wonder. She could feel his restraint. Every breath he did not take, every inch he did not move closer, like he feared his nearness might ruin the thing they had just begun. She broke the stillness, not with words, but by slowly lowering the candle and placing it gently on the window sill beside them. Darkness gathered at the edges of the room, But she didn't mind. The light was between them now. He watched her, still silent. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he didn't want to say the wrong thing. Not to her. She smiled faintly. "You've been watching me." He didn't deny it. "Every night," she said. "You were there." His voice was softer than dusk. "You read my soul before I could stop you. And I loved it," she whispered. "Every word." He bowed his head. It was the only way he could survive hearing that. Then, "I've never been more afraid of anything in my life than this moment," he said. "Why?" "Because this time I want you to stay." Her answer came not as a word, but as a movement. She leaned forward, slowly, enough that her forehead met his chest. And though his body was cold, she didn't flinch. He raised a hand, tentatively, reverently, and let it rest at the back of her head. And there, in the quiet dark of a house that had forgotten how to hold hope, he held her, not tightly, not possessively, just enough to say, "You are safe here. I don't want you to leave. And if I could give up eternity for this, I would." The next morning, the sun had risen pale through the fog. Eleanor waited. She didn't go down for breakfast, didn't open the diary. She simply waited. A knock never came. No footsteps in the hall, no figure in the doorway, no trace of the man she had touched. Held. She waited until midday. Then she found Mr. Hale in the conservatory, trimming the dead heads from a plant that hadn't bloomed in years. "Did he say anything?" she asked, standing in the doorway. The old butler didn't look up. "Miss? Lord Thorne. He came to me last night." Mr. Hale paused, slowly set down the shears. "I see," he said gently. "And what did he say?" She blinked. "You believe it was a dream?" He hesitated, not denying it, not confirming it. "If it comforted you," he said, "then perhaps that's enough." That night, she didn't light the fire. She didn't open the diary. She simply sat on the floor beside her bed, wrapped in her shawl like a child who'd fallen asleep in the wrong century. Her eyes were distant. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve. Then, quietly, too quietly to be for anyone else, she spoke. "Well, that was something, wasn't it?" A pause. "A man steps out of the shadows, holds you like you're made of glass, and then vanishes. No letter, no knock, no footsteps, not even a sigh down the hall." She let out a short breath, half laugh, half ache. "I thought I understood the rules. If a man holds you the way he held me, surely he returns in the morning." She reached up and touched her cheek. "Am I really so unremarkable?" She stood, walked to the mirror and stared at her reflection. Too round in the face, perhaps, soft at the jaw, a touch too plain for a tragic love story. She sniffed, then turned back toward the bed and sat again, this time not on the floor, but upright, as if posture might save her from heartbreak. I thought I knew him. The man in the pages, the one in the hallway, the one who touched me like I was a prayer he hadn't dared whisper in a century." Her voice trembled now. "But maybe I imagined it. Maybe he only wanted the story. Maybe he never wanted me." She wiped her eyes, frustrated by her own softness. "And here I am, whispering into silence like a fool." A pause. And then, softer, cracked, honest, raw. "I thought you knew. I really, really thought you knew." She let out a breath that shook more than she wanted it to. "Maybe it was always just me, wasn't it?" She laughed again, but this time it broke a little at the end. Then she curled up against the pillows, closed her eyes and tried to forget the feeling of his arms. He pressed his hand to the wood again, leaning forward until his brow touched the doorframe. He could hear her voice. He had never heard her cry, not truly, but he heard it now, hidden in the stillness, and it undid him. "She thinks I don't see her. She thinks I don't want her. If she only knew what it costs me not to hold her." He shut his eyes, pain rising like a tide he'd held back for far too long. "You speak, and my heart forgets it's not allowed to beat. You move, and I remember what it was to want something for no reason at all. You say nothing, and I hear everything." He clenched his jaw. "You look at shadows and still believe in light. You touch dust like it remembers being silk. You walk through silence and leave warmth in your wake." He swallowed. "And you wonder if I could love you. God, if you only knew how long I've waited for someone who wouldn't look away. If you only knew what it does to me to be near you and not reach for you." A pause, a breath. "I thought I'd forgotten how to feel. I thought I'd buried that part of me. But you," he broke off, pressed his fist gently to the door. "You brought me back without saying a word." She rose slowly from where she'd sat beside the bed. Her eyes stung, but no more tears came. She turned toward the door, not to leave, not to run, just to breathe. Her hand reached for the knob. She didn't expect it to move under her fingers, but it did. The door opened, not because she pulled, but because he was already there. Alaric stood in the corridor, pale as a memory, eyes wide with everything he hadn't dared to say aloud. She froze. So did he. The hallway light caught the soft strands of her hair, the shine on her lashes. He looked at her as though seeing sunlight for the first time in centuries. She tried to speak, but no words came. And so he stepped forward, slowly, like he feared one wrong move would make her vanish. His hand reached for hers and stopped just short. "I heard you," he said, voice barely audible. "I know," she whispered. Their hands met in the space between them, his cold fingers, her warm palm. Neither flinched. The embrace. He didn't kiss her. He didn't rush. He simply pulled her, gently, reverently, into his arms, and she let him. His chest was cold against her cheek, not frightening cold, just the kind of cold that made her ache to give him a warmth. She wrapped her arms around his back, pressed closer. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "For what?" she breathed. "For making you think you weren't everything I've waited for." She closed her eyes, and in that silence neither said a word. Because they didn't need to. He had loved her in silence. She had answered without knowing. And now, in this quiet, trembling stillness, they both knew. The morning after he held her, she awoke with a strange stillness in her chest. Not joy, not peace, but the ache of knowing he still hadn't returned. She'd had enough of doors, enough of waiting, enough of him loving her in shadows and slipping away before morning. She came down to the great hall where Mr. Haley was polishing silver and said firmly, "I want to see him." The old man didn't stop his task. He raised an eyebrow, but not in surprise. "I imagine you do," he said simply. "I know he doesn't sleep. I know he's awake now. Tell me where he goes." Mr. Hale sighed, dried his hands, and looked her over with something like quiet approval. "You're braver than most." She didn't flinch. "And you're more dangerous than you know," he added. He turned, walked toward the back corridor, and stopped before a narrow passageway nearly swallowed by the wall. He pointed with the soft lift of his chin. "There," he said. "Down the east wing, third right, past the clock that no longer ticks. Second staircase. Stop when you feel the temperature drop. And then, knock," he said. "Like you would if you were calling someone home." It was old, unpainted, quiet. She raised her hand, knocked. No answer, at first. Then a voice, calm, clipped, slightly distracted. "Yes, come in, Mr. Hale." She opened the door. He was pacing. The room was cavernous. High ceilings and stone walls warmed only by firelight and shadows. Books everywhere. Maps. A sword across the mantel. He didn't see her at first. Not until he turned mid-step and stopped. His breath left him just slightly. "Eleanor," she closed the door behind her gently. "You walk like a man trying not to feel something," she said. He looked away. The fire crackled. She stepped forward. "And you didn't come this morning. Why?" He was silent. So she continued. "I need to understand. Do you regret holding me?" "No." "Then why did you leave me alone again?" He turned slowly. "I'm not used to being wanted," he said. "I made that clear enough, didn't I?" "Yes," he said. "Too clear. That's the danger." He moved toward the hearth. His voice dropped. "The moment you touched me, something inside me remembered what it was to feel, to ache, to want warmth again. And I realized, I don't want to stay this way." "You mean as you are?" "I mean, not human, not fully." She watched him. "I want to feel warmth again," he said. "Not just yours, my own. I want to walk beside you in the sun. I want to taste the air and not fear it." He looked up. "But I don't know if that's allowed. If someone like me can ever be made whole." "You can," she said. He blinked. "How can you be so sure?" She took a breath. "Because I know someone who can restore what's broken." He frowned, confused. She smiled gently. "You've lived without warmth, without rest, without God." He froze, and she stepped closer. "You were never beyond his reach, Alaric. You just stopped believing he'd reach for you." She had left his chamber with peace in her voice, but a tremble in her heart. That night she knelt by her bed, again, and then the next night, and the one after that. For 7 nights she prayed, not loudly, not desperately, but with quiet, aching hope. Her hands folded gently over her lap, her head bowed, her breath rising like a soft offering to heaven. She asked for no miracles, only this: let him feel. And outside her door each night without fail, he stood, unmoving, eyes closed, listening. He never knocked, never spoke. He only listened, to her voice, to her prayers, to the sound of someone who believed he could be more than a shadow. He remembered faintly what that had felt like as a child, the hush of prayer in his uncle's chapel, the scent of candles, the echo of ancient hymns in stone. And somewhere between the first night and the seventh, he began to believe, not all at once, but like the first warmth of morning after a winter too long. He never spoke of it, neither did she, but he began to hunger again, not for blood, but for bread, for tea, for the scent of warmth that lingered behind her when she passed. And still, he said nothing, not because he didn't trust her, but because he didn't know how to hope aloud. It was nearly midnight on the seventh night. A storm whispered against the windows like memory. She was in her chamber reading, not the diary, just something to keep the ache from spreading. She heard the softest knock. Then the door creaked open, and he was there. He didn't stand like a shadow this time. He stepped fully into the light. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Uncertainty. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was deeper than she remembered, slower. "I am," she said. "Are you?" He didn't answer. He only walked to where she sat on the edge of the bed, and without asking, without speaking, he knelt. He was taller than her even then. So when he leaned forward, his arms wrapped gently around her waist and his head, heavy with emotion, pressed against her shoulder, near her cheek. And then she felt it. Not just the weight of him, but the warmth. Real, radiant, startling. So hot it made her blink. Her hand slid to his back as if pulled by instinct, and she whispered, "You're so warm." His arms tightened, not possessively, but like someone who had finally come in from the cold. He buried his face deeper into the curve of her neck and trembled, and she, gentle, wide-eyed, awestruck, let herself be held. Let him feel safe, let herself be wanted. And for one suspended, sacred moment, he was not a creature, not a myth, not a man broken by centuries. He was just a soul held in love. Maybe you thought this was just a love story, about a vampire, a woman, a crumbling manor lost in the mountains. But really, this story is about you, the vampire, Alaric. He represents every soul that's ever felt like they were too far gone, too broken, too cold, too different, too much or not enough. He watched 41 people walk away. He stopped believing love would ever come. And maybe so have you. But listen to me. The right one stays. You are not forgotten. You are not too late. You are not too broken to be seen, held, wanted, or loved. You are God's creation, handcrafted, one of a kind, fearfully and wonderfully made. And love, real love, is never too far for the one who restores all things. So if you've been hiding in the shadows, come back into the light, because someone is praying for you. Someone is waiting to love you. And maybe, just maybe, that love is already on its way.